Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Ramadan, the month-long fast in Islam. It started on June 4th. The fast will last until July 5th. This fast, which is called al-Sim or Tzom in the Quran, is one of the 5 major pillars of Islam. The objective of Ramadan fast is to gain introspection, self-improvement, and atonement. The fast and the entire month-long period emphasizes improving the person, the believer, in the context of Islam itself. 1.6 billion Muslims around the world are said to be fasting. That's over 22% of the 7 billion people on earth. It's not clear how many Muslims actually do fast, but even if it's only half that number, it's still a huge and significant number of people, spending time working on self-improvement and asking for atonement. During Ramadan, Muslims break their fast each night at sundown. Our English word breakfast has the same origin. We break our fast every morning after not having eaten all night. Muslims break fast after not having eaten all day. Ramadan creeps around the calendar. The Muslim calendar is lunar, not solar-based. A lunar month is 29 plus days long. A lunar year is only 354 days long. The Islamic society did not create a correction, such as a leap year. So next year, Ramadan will fall about 11 days off of this year. And the following year will be 22 days after this year's Ramadan, and so on and so on. So while this year Ramadan is celebrated in the summer, in 6 years from now, it will fall in a different season. The Jewish calendar is also lunar-based, but that calendar put in a leap year correction factor, so that Passover is always in the spring and Rosh Hashanah is always in the fall. Even the solar year is off slightly and needs the correction of a 366th day every so often. In the Quran, the original Muslim fast was only 1 day long. It paralleled the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, and it was called Ashura. Like Yom Kippur, it was on the 10th day of the month. Ashura actually means the 10th in Arabic. But after the Jewish tribes of Arabia rejected Muhammad's message, the Prophet changed the single day-long fast into a month-long fast of Ramadan. That change, along with other changes, was designed to break from Judaism and one-up the tradition upon which Islam was based. And that also explains why the Qibla, which is the direction one faces during Islamic prayer, turned its back on Jerusalem and began instead to pray towards Mecca. It also is when Islam moved from praying 3 times a day, as Jews do, to praying 5 times a day, which is known in Islam as Salat. For some Muslims, however, Ramadan is more than inspection and atonement. ISIS is calling on Muslims around the world to attack infidels during Ramadan. ISIS and other terrorists see this month as a time very well suited for attacking the enemy, the Western infidel, who abused and attacked Islam. A new ISIS video has been posted by Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the spokesperson of ISIS, calling on followers to strike at as many targets as possible during the month of Ramadan. The nearly 30-minute-long message was very explicit, calling on ISIS supporters to advance the cause everywhere they live. Al-Adnani says, Ramadan is coming, the month of attacks and jihad, the month of conquest, so be prepared and be on alert. And make sure that every one of you spends it, Ramadan, in the name of God on the attack, requesting from God that it, Ramadan, God willing, will be a month of calamity on the non-believers anywhere, especially by those soldiers and supporters of the caliphate in Europe and America. The smallest action you do in their heartland is better and more enduring to us than what you would if you were with us. If one of you hoped to reach the Islamic State, We wish we were in your place to punish the Crusaders day and night. There's no way to interpret these comments other than as a call to arms for followers and lone wolves to do whatever they can, however they can, wherever they live. But there is also a secondary, even subliminal message. It's being transmitted here. ISIS is telling their followers that attacks perpetrated against the West are more valuable to them than traveling and joining the fight in the Middle East. ISIS needs local people to perpetrate attacks. They want more independent cells to develop and strike, just like they did in France, in Belgium, and of course in Orlando. ISIS wants to take the fight to our shores, and they want to do it now during the month of Ramadan. That is exactly what transpired at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, when an ISIS terrorist went in and murdered 49 and injured 53. That is also what happened in the stabbing 30 miles outside of Paris, when an ISIS terrorist stabbed someone and barricaded himself inside the home of the police chief. There's a tendency for the authorities to say that they're not certain that ISIS is behind the attacks. That's because authorities are using ancient definitions. They insist that they need proof that the terrorists are part of a group. ISIS claims responsibility, and the terrorists themselves say that they're part of ISIS. But for some, that's still not enough for the authorities. It seems leaders cower and are afraid of the words Islamic terror. The authorities are afraid of the implications, but they're making a very grave mistake. ISIS is not dwindling. They're not shrinking. And in actuality, they're on the rise. ISIS attacked a Russian military base in Syria on May 14th. 4 Mi-24 helicopters were burned. 20 trucks were destroyed, a storage depot was hit, and a MiG-25 fighter jet was damaged. The base is known as T4, sometimes also called TIAS. ISIS is hitting Russia hard, and they're proud of it. One day after the attack, on May 15th, ISIS went on the air on their website called Amaq and claimed credit for the destruction. 10 days later, on May 25th, the British press broke the story. The BBC, The Independent, the Daily Mail, The Guardian, and various other news services ran articles about the attack, but only after an independent intelligence company named Stratfor, headquartered in, of all places, Texas, published before and after satellite photos of the Russian base. Satellite photos clearly showed the impact of the attack and resulting fires. The base is situated in Homs province, about halfway between the city of Homs and Palmyra. The pictures made it perfectly clear that the damage could not have been the result of a single accidental fire or a mere gas tank explosion. Despite the proof that Stratford produced, Russia said that the entire story was rubbish and that it never happened. And that is a story they're sticking to. While it seems that there's no question that there was an ISIS attack that induced the fire, Russia does not want the world at large, and especially the Russians back home, to think that this was the work of ISIS. They do not want anyone to know that they suffered a series of hits at the hands of ISIS. World press and the press in the United States have been slow to cover the entire matter, but that is often par for the course. CNN ran a piece on their website on May 25th asking if it happened. The piece was called, "Did ISIS Attack Military Equipment at Key Russian Base?" Fox News, too, expressed skepticism, but the Jerusalem Post ran a story without questioning its veracity, as did the International Business Journal, so did even the New Zealand Herald. It's not out of the ordinary for a country to hold back on reports about ISIS attacks due to lack of credible information and confirmation from the defense establishment. When an attack is in a remote location, especially a military site, unlike venues ISIS chose to attack, let's say in Belgium or France, and now in Orlando, concealing the story is not all that difficult to do. The United States did not publicize the March 21st ISIS attack on their secret special ops. Neither did they publicize an attack that took place 2 days earlier, in which a U.S. Marine named Lewis Carden was killed. And when details did emerge, that story, too, was hardly even mentioned in the Western press. ISIS attacks against the U.S. took place in Firebase Bell, a secret U.S. Special Forces base in northern Iraq. Staff Sergeant Lewis Carden was killed by the ISIS rocket that struck the base. The number of injured during the attack has still not been released. We do know, however, that the company at the base composed of slightly less than 200 soldiers. ISIS discovered the U.S. base and figured that they could hit it from a distance by launching rockets into the camp. The first maneuver was so successful that ISIS returned 2 days later and did it again. Certainly, this was a major flaw in U.S. security. The Russians and the U.S. bases were probably hit by Grad rockets. The Grads are mounted on the back of jeeps or pickup trucks, and they just shoot and drive away. Attackers also use rocket launchers and shoulder-launched multi-purpose assault weapons. They're called SMAWs, weapons that are easy to carry. Russia is now suffering the same style of attack at the hands of ISIS, and they know it. The Russians are now the #1 target on the ISIS hit list. We saw it when Russia took down the Russian airplane just after it took off from the Egyptian resort and blew up the plane, killing all 224 people on board. The plane was blown up with a tiny bomb placed in an innocent-looking soda drink and loaded onto the plane. It's not surprising that Russia has been mum about the attacks against them. The precedent has already been set, though. Russia, like the United States, needs to prevent ISIS from getting close enough to shoot at their bases. But it's a bit surprising that ISIS has waited so long. ISIS is trying to exact revenge on the aggressive Russian attacks against its operations, its towns, its cities in Syria and in Iraq. Russia also knows that they cannot allow ISIS to attack them again like they just did. They must protect the perimeter just like the United States is doing. Russia needs to remember that ISIS is dangerous. The Russians need to protect their six, that is their rear. ISIS has become emboldened, and now the entire West needs to be on alert. The ISIS attack in Orlando, Florida, should be a clear reminder to the United States that they are in the crosshairs of ISIS. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to talk about two columns, both from USA Today, each taking a different side on how to deal with ISIS. They're both from June 7th in USA Today. They literally appear next to one another as opposing ideas. First is an editorial. The other is a section called The Opposing View. First up is the editorial, in a section called Our View, from USA Today's editorial board. The piece is called Battle for Fallujah Shows You Can't Just Bomb ISIL. Online, the piece is subtitled, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz Don't Know What They're Talking About on Fighting ISIL. The titles are misleading because the editorial is actually arguing for bombing and the opposing view is arguing to limit the bombing. Here is how the editorial begins. Presidential campaigns have a destructive way of telling voters that the nation's toughest problems are mindlessly simple to fix. Just build a wall, pay off a national debt, bring jobs back from overseas. In fact, no president could do those things, or at least not without enormous difficulty and huge unintended consequences. That's rarely been truer than when candidates weigh in on how to defeat the Islamic State, the bloodthirsty group that seized swaths of Syria and Iraq. If there's any lesson from 9/11, it's that it's a bad idea to let an extremist group fester unchecked in a place from which it can plan and carry out attacks on the United States, as al-Qaeda did in 2001 from its sanctuary in Afghanistan. The editorial board is correct that campaigns, political campaigns especially, make solutions seem very easy, but it goes wrong, or better, they suggest something equally simplistic. The USA Today editorial board lashes out at Trump and Cruz for saying that the answer is simply carpet bombing. But all the editors recommend is that the situation is complicated. Well, how simplified is that? The editorial describes that the human shields in Fallujah are very dangerous. ISIL fighters want to keep the civilians in Fallujah as human shields, and they've shot and killed many who've tried to flee. Iraqi forces are deliberately going slowly to avoid killing civilians. Many will die anyway. In order to root out the estimated 800 to 1,000 ISIL militants holding the city, the idea of indiscriminately bombing a city of 50,000, including an estimated 20,000 children, to kill or drive out 1,000 fighters is simplistic nonsense. The editorial now shows that ISIS is losing ground. The truth is that there's no easy way to defeat ISIL, but the current approach is showing some results. ISIL hasn't seized any new territory in Iraq this year. The Iraqi forces have retaken about 45% of what ISIL initially seized. That's good news. The attack on Fallujah displays all the flaws as well, chiefly the uneasy alliance of Iraqi government forces and the Shiite militia. Shiites' brutality against Sunnis is a chief reason Sunni enclaves such as Fallujah repeatedly fall to Sunni extremists such as ISIL. The editors then show that the U.S. is actually using the Air Force for air support. Air support does not mean watching, it means bombing, heavy bombing. The U.S. is providing air support, training, and logistical backup for Iraqi forces. That's appropriate. What America hasn't been able to do is to bring about a tolerant, inclusive Iraqi government that restrains majority oppression of the nation's Sunni minority. The editors conclude by writing, this leaves a big unanswered question. Even if the U.S.-backed Iraqi army manages to liberate Fallujah and then Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, from ISIL control, what happens next? I think their argument is weak, very, very weak. Second up, the opposing side is by Doug Bandow. Bandow was a senior fellow at Cato Institute and former special assistant to President Reagan. Bandow's argument is the West needs to help locals take over Fallujah. He believes that the West, and especially the United States, should not be fighting or bombing, and that it only opens a huge potential for U.S. war crimes. Here is how Bandow begins. Twice in 2004, the U.S. military fought bitter campaigns to conquer Fallujah, a Sunni city that became a stronghold for former Baathists, Sunni insurgents, and al-Qaeda. Alas, ruled by the Shiite-dominated government in Baghdad felt like an occupation. When the Islamic State targeted Fallujah 2 years ago, the terrorist group easily gained control of the city. Fallujah needs to be retaken, but by Iraqi forces. Bandow says that bombing it is seriously limited as a tool to take over a region, and the risks of civilian casualties is huge, and the U.S. runs the risk of becoming war criminals. He writes, yet air power is of limited value in an urban campaign, while the risk of civilian casualties is great. Washington already has been criticized for killing Iraqi civilians elsewhere. Given the American military's history in Fallujah, the U.S. is at risk of being charged, fairly or not, with causing civilian deaths there. Bandow concludes that there are risks if the U.S. is involved, especially because of the Shiite-Sunni divisions. He concludes in the following way. Sunni leaders already have accused the U.S. of allying itself with terrorists and sacrificing human rights. Should the liberation of Fallujah be followed by Shiite forces brutalizing the Sunni population, Washington will be blamed. Washington has proved that it cannot control events in Iraq. Only the Iraqis can resolve political problems that led to military losses. Fallujah is the Iraqis' fight. Bandow does not really offer a good solution to the problem because the Iraqis don't solve their own problems. The best way to help is from the air by bombing ISIS strongholds despite the risk. The U.S. must try to avoid civilian deaths, but they must pummel ISIS from the air. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to talk about 4 cartoons today, 2 from the U.S. and 2 from Europe. All deal with the horrific attack in Orlando, Florida. The first cartoon is from Germany. It's called Hell in Paradise by Peter Pestrovich and was published in the Kleine Zeitung, an Austrian paper, on June 13th, 2016. It depicts a welcome sign to Orlando, the beautiful city. The sign is broken down and filled with bullet holes. The holes spell out the word terror. The theme of the cartoon is actually based on Orlando and Disney, where it's a city of happiness. Orlando Disney is a magical city, a city that's nearly perfect. It's clean, no garbage even. Everything is beautiful. And terror descended and destroyed all of that. Next up is a cartoon by Mike Lukovich, published on June 13th also, 2016, by creator Syndicate. The cartoon has Abe Lincoln crying, and the tear in his eye is a multicolored tear symbolizing the unity colors of the LGBTQ community. Third up is a U.S. flag. It's by Gary McCoy, published June 13th, 2016, by Kegel Cartoons. Above the flag reads, "We mourn 50 dead Americans in Orlando." The parallel between the 50 stars and the 50 dead is very, very poignant. Finally, this last cartoon is from Portugal. It's by Christian Sampiao and was published on June 13th, 2016. This image portrays an ISIS terrorist with a machine gun shooting up the LGBTQ rainbow image. The image is stained with blood. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. For more than a year, I've been arguing that the Western world lacks a true understanding of the threat of terror. Now, finally, NATO is discussing the appointment of an assistant director for intelligence. They are finally thinking about creating a position specifically designed to confront ISIS. There are those who are in favor and those who are still opposed to creating this new position. It's not yet clear whether NATO will indeed create the position and allot the clout and the funds and the personnel necessary to create a division to confront ISIS through the establishment of a unified intelligence system in Europe. Should it ever come into existence, by the way, the new division must place emphasis on cyber terror, cyber trolls, and cyber intel. They need to get up close and personal in the dark web and watch ISIS very carefully. One major problem that NATO will confront if this unit were to be created is that the unit will step on the toes of other non-aligned nations. That issue will need to be resolved. The price of oil is almost $50 a barrel. The prices continue to creep up, even though Canadian Suncor Energy oil sands project is about to hit the market. The price of oil continues to slowly climb, and that has important ramifications, not just for our pocketbooks. If oil continues to climb beyond $50 and goes to $70 or $75, it will empower Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia both suffered when oil prices dropped. Saudi Arabia lost power and influence. Iran nearly went bankrupt. The tide is turning once again, and that's not good news for the West. Oil is the tool that greases the wheels of power and influence in large parts of the world. The United States State Department issued a statement about Israel and the Palestinians. According to the statement, Israel must avoid an increase of tensions with the Palestinians in the aftermath of the terror attack perpetrated in central Tel Aviv that resulted in the murder of 4 Israelis and left another 16 people injured. Excuse me, Israel must? Does the U.S. State Department actually expect Israel to kiss the Palestinians for this? What would a responsible U.S. response be in such a situation? Israel always exercises restraint. Otherwise, there would be wanton killing and counterattacking. And when Israel does launch an operation, it's surgical, a surgical strike, and carried out with the utmost care to avoid civilian casualties. Palestinian terrorists, on the other hand, embark on a mission to murder and injure as many civilians as possible. It's hard not to be incensed by these boneheaded official directives come statements issued by the United States. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know terror is not new at all in America and to the Americans? It's just that the U.S. has not really considered it a significant issue until 9/11. And then afterwards, it again dropped because it was so distant. Listen to just a few of the horrific terror attacks against Americans and America. In 1983 in Beirut, U.S. peacekeepers were attacked, killing 307, wounding 241. In 1993, the World Trade Center, the same target as 9/11, was hit by the same people, Al-Qaeda, killing 6, wounding over 1,000. In 1996, in Saudi Arabia, terrorists targeted U.S. citizens, killing 19. In 1998, simultaneous U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania killed 263 and wounded over 5,000. Most of those were locals. In 2000, the USS Cole was attacked, killing 17. Terror is not new, and it is not going away. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.